Okay, we are going to try this one more time. Oh, no, no, no. Don't do this to me. Okay. For some reason, I have to replace the stream key every single time. So let's just try this now. And do this and plug this in. And this is like the 5th time I've done this. Alright. Here we go. We're trying it one more time. Go live. And maybe possibly connecting to live video. And it looks like we might be live. Okay, we're trying this one more time. If this doesn't work, I give up and I'm going to have to go back to school on this. So if there's anybody that can hear me, please let me know. Just type some gibberish, anything, so that I know what's up here, because you know, it's one of those technology mess up days. Oh man, oh man, oh man. Let me just go ahead and transition this to this. It looks like we might have. Yay! Excellent. Richard, thank you so much. I've had so much problems. It's taken me 45 minutes easy to get this to work. So anyway, now it's I'm gonna have to hold this guy for just a minute so we can do this while we're getting started anyway. I want to say thank you to all who have endured this with me and are watching. I do have a few announcements I want to make. So I need to make this announcement. The week of March 14th, we have a debate scheduled between me and John Welch, a local preacher here in Indianapolis. We will be discussing the topic of resurrection. I'm babysitting my grandson tonight, so he's helping out a little bit for a minute or two while he plays. That it's going to be 4 nights on that. Yeah, Roy. This guy is yeah, he's something else. But just love him to death. So this is actually the third day we've got him. So we've had a lot of fun this week. So this debate will be the week of March 14th. I believe this is March 15 and 16, 18 and 19, if I recall correctly, without looking. And it will be between me and John Welch at the High School Road Church of Christ here in Indianapolis. I'll be giving you more details as we come along. We're going to be debating in live oral public debate, not on YouTube. Well, it will be broadcast live and archived also. But it will also be there at High School Road. It's going to be live. The debate, discussion, ideas being put back and forth. So mark your calendars for that. Next week, I think we are going to have a guest on the show. That will be possibly just a live video, messenger call, however we got to do it to get him on air. So we'll be doing that, and all this has made me forget his name for the life of me. Don't take offense to it, because I know he's probably listening. I'm just it's just I get distracted and I forget my own kids' names. If I forget my wife's name, I'm really in trouble. But either way, we'll do that. I'll tell you here in just a minute. And then on top of that, coming up at some point, we will be having Solomon Baidu. I'm not exactly sure how to pronounce it, but he is a preacher. I think he's in Uganda, and has come to the preterist position through much tribulation, and he decided to accept the truth and not what men tell him to do. So we're thankful for that. Going to be talking to him. I don't know exactly when that's going to be. We still have a few details to work out and so forth. But as soon as we get that done, I will let everybody know. And amen to that, Roy. So we'll get that done, and we will start talking with him in a little bit. I think you'll be encouraged by what you hear from him. Seems like a pretty good guy. It's amazing that we can talk the way that we can over thousands and thousands of miles, on the other side of the planet. Just amazing to me, anyway. So outside of that, I want to talk about try to finish up what we started. Did I even put a title in this video? It doesn't look like I did. Maybe I did. Let me check. Yes, I did. What about, yeah, we're good on YouTube too. So we're going to talk about, hopefully, the rest of these signs that the end has come from Matthew, the 24th chapter. Now, I'm not going to go through a lot of recap with this, but I'll tell you, Roy Running's a prophet somewhat, because 3 weeks ago he said, you'll never get through that in one hour, and he was 100% right about that. So I've given it a shot anyway. So I hear my I didn't even have time to get my background put up or anything. So you're just gonna have to deal with the mess in the back and the baby in the background. So, but that's okay. He's a pretty good little kid. Now we're going to say a few hellos. I want to say hey to Edith, and I just really appreciate you guys joining us. Solomon is Ghana. That's right. So I want to say hey to Edith. Love having you with us, and Rick and Isaac, and obviously Roy is with us. Brother Tim Ogles and Richard Smotherman and Richard Bailey. So thank you so much, and thank you for letting me know that you could actually hear. So let's get into talking about this from Matthew chapter 24. Now in Matthew 24, Jesus is talking with Peter, James, John, and Andrew. And they ask him a question. You might want to say, well, they asked him 3 questions, but no, they didn't. So let me just point this out. The question that was asked, and there's Marjorie and Brother Rooster. Good to have you both with us tonight. They asked one question. It wasn't Beidou, okay. It wasn't 3 questions. If it was 3 questions, then I guess the Spirit of Yahweh forgot to add those questions in Mark's version and Luke's version, because it doesn't read that way. So you've got 2 out of the 3 synoptics that do not have 3 quote-unquote questions, but rather they have 1 question. Now let me point this out to you. In chapter 24 of Matthew, verse 1, Jesus came out from the temple and was going away when his disciples came up to point out the temple buildings to him. And he said to them, do you not see all these things? Oh, so sorry. I don't know where that came from. I apologize. Do you not see all these things? Truly I say to you, not one stone here will be left upon another which will not be torn down. So Jesus says, look, you're pointing these out, and I'm telling you, they're not going to be here. I mean, they are going to be destroyed. They're going to be torn down. So verse 3, as he was sitting on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately, saying, well, tell us when these things will happen, and what will be the sign of your coming and the end of the age. Now, of course, I'm reading from the New American Standard Version. Now, the funny thing about this is this version really is not great. At least here in this particular passage. Boy, I got phones going off. Sometimes it's hard to just pay attention. Anyway, so it's yeah. Actually, I think Isaac, I look forward to that, and Tim, You're right. I'm sure it's over 300 or somewhere around that by this point. So he says here, he asked the question, and you're coming at the end of the age. I said that this is actually pretty good. Okay, I have got to silence this thing, and I'm about ready to throw it out the door. That way I can pay attention to what I'm doing. So the word age here is appropriate. The term or the word world is not in line with what the scriptures teach from the Greek standpoint. It's not world, it is age, and those are two huge and vastly different things. So what we have to understand here is they were asking one question. Now let me point this out. Here's why this is one question. Okay. Got to give the baby a drink here. There we go. Okay. So here, give this to Grandma then. Take that to Grandma. All right. She'll help him. I'll tell you, being a grandpa is an awesome, awesome thing. It's a lot different than being a dad, I can tell you that. So let me get back to this. I apologize about all my scatterbrainedness tonight. They asked one question. It was, exegetically, contextually. This is one topic. Listen to what they said. Tell us, when will these things happen? And what will be the sign of your coming and the end of the age? This isn't, first question, when will these things happen? 2, the sign of your coming. And 3, the end of the world. So that doesn't work. Not contextually, exegetically. I mean, it just simply does not work. Matter of fact, I'm going to read this to you from the LSV, Literal Standard Version. And when he was sitting on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came near to him by himself, saying, "Tell us, when will these be? And what is the sign of your coming? And the full end of the age?" So there's no way possible that when you look at this in a literal standpoint, that they were asking 3 questions. This was all related to one particular context and one particular point that they had just been talking about. So I'll just leave it at that. Let's move on here. So I'm gonna shut that. So let's just kind of move on here. Here's the first 8 things that we've talked about up to this point. We've talked about false Christ. We've talked about wars and rumors of wars. We've talked about nation rising against nation. That's in verse 7. And also in verse 7, we've talked about famines. We've talked about earthquakes in verse 7. We've talked about birth pangs in verse 8. We've talked about tribulation in verse 9. We've talked about martyrdom in verse 9. Now, also in verse 9, I guess goes hand in hand with this idea of martyrdom, is hate. And when you think about this concept of hate, this was going to be a sign. Everything that I've said up to this point were going to be signs of what they asked him. Now, what was the question that they asked? Tell us, when will these things happen? What will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age, or the full or complete end, or the consummation of the age, according to LSV. Now, when you look at it from the literal standpoint, it's not 3 questions. It's this one concept. And then Jesus proceeds to answer, and he says to them about all these things. False Christ, rumors of wars, nation rising against nation, famines, earthquakes, birth pangs, tribulation, martyrdom, and hate up to this point. So this idea of martyrdom and hate, I mean, just think about this. He says this is a sign. Well, at what point in the last 2,000 years have Christians not been hated? I mean, think about this. Look at our own time period right now. We live in a time, and even in our nation, where Christianity is being hated. And it's, amen, Brother Rooster. Hi. You want to answer this question for me? Richard Bailey asks a pretty tough question. I really don't know if I want to answer it. Because I have reasons I don't want to answer that. But I'll try. Okay, Richard, give me a minute here. And we'll get to this idea of age and generation. Okay, so he said, now get this, okay? So let's just keep this in context. So in 24, he says these are going to be the signs of the end. How many questions about the end were asked in verse 3? All right? Let me get over here. Let me do this again. How many questions about the end coming are asked in verse 3? Let me read this one more time. As he was sitting on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately, saying, "Tell us when all these things happen, and what will be the I lost my place, and what will be the sign of your coming and the end of the age." So when did they ask about the end? Did they ask about one end or two end or three ends? Contextually, how many ends were asked about? Yeah, that's right. Just one. Right? You tell him. See, even Colton can figure this one out. So, okay. He is up and down and up and down. Go to Grandma. Go on. So I can get back to this. Okay. Let me put it this way, guys. He really loves me or something. He wants me to hold him constantly. So we'll do the we'll do the best that I can. I am so sorry, but it is good to be with a little guy that likes me so much. How many ends? Colton answered it. It's just one end. Now, right, just one end. So we've got this question. This one question that they asked about one end. You can't have many ends coming from this. So one of the signs, the next one that we're getting to, goes hand in hand with martyrdom, and that's hate. In Matthew 10, see if I can do this one-handed over here. So in Matthew chapter 10, you've got Jesus bringing this out. Now listen to what he says in verse 16. "Behold, I send you out as sheep in the midst of wolves, so be shrewd as serpents and innocent as doves, but beware of men, for they will hand you over to the courts. They will scourge you in their synagogues, and you will even be brought before governors and kings for my sake, as a testimony to them, to the Gentiles. But when they hand you over, do not worry about what you are to say, for it will be given you in that hour. And for it is not you who speak, but it is the Spirit of the Father who speaks in you." He says, "Brother's going to betray brother to death, and father his child, and children will rise up against parents and cause them to be put to death. You will be hated by all." There it is in verse 22. "You'll be hated by all." Listen to this. "You will be hated by all because of my name. But it is the one who has endured to the end who will be saved." So, are you happy? You got something to say? Yes, I know what you just said. You just said, "Right, Grandpa, you preach it." Isn't that what you just said? I think it was. So there it is. Now this hate goes hand in hand with martyrdom, and we need to make this point. But this is a sign. So does that mean that because of what's going on today, that people hate us and Christians are being? I mean, this is not a good time in history for Christians. Does that mean that since people hate Christians and Christianity is frowned upon, to say the least, and our values and morality is rapidly disappearing from the world to other religions? I mean, you have Islam that is growing exponentially, and they literally hate us. So does that mean that because Christians are going to be hated and are being martyred today, that's a sign of the end? No, it's not a sign of the end. Now, one of the end of the planet might be a sign of Christianity taking a dip, but it's not a sign of the end of the world. You see, all of these signs were prescribed for the time of the birth pangs. Now, if you maybe you're a dispensationalist and you don't think the church has come yet, or the kingdom has come, or something, and you're putting that off in the future. So that's the only way you could do that. The sad thing is, and so many people in my how do I say this? You all know that I'm, I preach in the Church of Christ, and I've in the last few years, made a drastic change in some of my views and my beliefs, and I'm still part of the Church of Christ. Don't get me wrong, but I'm a part of the biblical Church of Christ now. I'm not a part of something that is maybe just more of a name than what it ought to be. Sadly, so I get a lot of ribbing. I get a lot of people saying bad things about me constantly. That is not what was prescribed in the first century. The birth pangs, and we talked about this last week, but these birth pangs came in the first century. Now, if you think that I'm wrong about this, and then all of these signs have to be in the first century, that creates a real problem for our brethren. When were these birth pangs to take place? Ironically, one of the things that we need to do is be able to compare Scripture with Scripture and let the Scriptures teach us these things. Think about this. Ready for this? One of the things that we have to look at when it comes to these birth pangs and is found in 1 Thessalonians. Grandma's got your tea. This kid loves unsweet tea. It's crazy. Not so good to be giving him at nighttime, but either way. Yeah, that's okay. So go to 1 Thessalonians chapter 5. Now notice this. If you think 1 Thessalonians 4 and 5 are separated because there's a great big numeral 5 in front of now as to the times and epochs, and that means that there's a separation, you got this all wrong. It's the same thing. Now look at this. We know 1 Thessalonians 4 is about the resurrection. There's no way around this, right? I mean, look at verse 17. Then we who are alive and remain would be caught up together with him in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air. And so we shall always be with the Lord. Therefore, comfort one another with these words. There's no question that that's what this is about. And you just read the context of it. So there's no question that that's what this is about. But in chapter 5, listen to this. As to the times and the epochs, brethren, it's still the same thought. Nothing has changed. No gear has been shifted. Unless he's shifting into high gear in the same thought. Maybe you'd look at it that way. But he says, and I quote, brethren, you have no need of anything to be written to you, for you yourselves know full well that the day of the Lord will come just like a thief in the night. While they are saying peace and safety, then destruction will come upon them suddenly like labor pains upon a woman with child, and they will not escape. When is this supposed to happen? Do you realize he's quoting the Olivet Discourse? Paul was not there, as far as I know. I guess he could have been in Jerusalem. I think he had some relatives that lived in Jerusalem, and he certainly would have been old enough to have been there in Jerusalem at that time. Here it comes again. But, hey, Paul's quoting the Olivet Discourse. By inspiration, he's teaching them these things that they need to hear. They need to know. Because why? Listen to this. But you, brethren, are not in darkness, verse 4, that the day, what day? What day is he talking about? Let's go back to verse 1. Now, as to the times and the epochs, brethren, you have no need of anything to be written to you. For you yourselves know full well that the day, what's the day that he says is not going to overtake them like a thief? For the day of the Lord will come just like a thief. And he says in verse 4, but you, brethren, are not in darkness, that the day would overtake you like a thief. For you are all sons of light and sons of day. We are not of night or of darkness. So you got this whole point that's being made here, that this isn't going to be something that takes them by surprise. During this time of these labor pains or these birth pains, that was the beginning of the church. Joel 2, we've went over this. Actually, it's all of Joel, pretty much. But we've went over this. So this is nothing new. So maybe you can go back and watch the other videos. That will help a little bit. Um, so, okay, let me point this out. Pay no attention to Stephen Whitsitt. Now everybody's going to go and look at it. Actually, First and Second Thessalonians were the first books to be written in I think anyway, in the canon of the New Testament. And I don't know, there are scholars that want to place Matthew like 150, and I bet Stephen is probably in that category, which would be well past the time of inspiration. Anything after 70 that was written after 70 is not inspired. Even if John himself wrote it, it's still not inspired. Might be wise, don't get me wrong, but it's not inspired. Inspiration ended in 70 at the destruction of the temple and the creation of the new heavens and the new earth. Okay, so let's get back to this. So this sign of hate is, well, it's pretty obvious, isn't it? It comes along with persecution. And let's go to the next one. So now keep this in mind. These are all signs that the end is coming. And the time markers are there, and there's simply no question. There's simply no question. The next one is after hate would be number 10, that many fall away. So here, look at verse 10, and let's just read this. So Jesus says, at that time many will fall away and will betray one another and hate one another. So it's kind of wrapped up in this idea of hate. So people falling away is a sign of the end that is coming. Now keep in mind, they asked, what are the signs of the end? Now you're going to have to make this the end of the world. And if all of these signs happen at the time that the church was forming and had its beginning in the kingdom, there on the day of Pentecost and so forth, then think about this. What end is this? If it was the end of the world, then why are we still here? I love that question. People ask me, well, then why are we still here? Well, I'm asking you, futurists, why are we still here? If he was asking about answering these questions and saying, here's the sign when the end will come. So I want to point out, in Luke chapter 18, I think it's Luke 18, Jesus says, will the Son of Man find faith when he comes back? Listen to this. This is Luke chapter 18 and verse 8. Here's what he says. I tell you that he will bring about justice for them quickly. However, when the Son of Man comes, will he find faith on the earth? So he's asking this question. You know, many people are going to fall away, and this is one of the signs. So are people falling away today? Yeah, of course. And you got a lot of people who've placed so much stock in this elections and a president and government, and they, believe that, surely Yahweh or God is not going to allow something like this to happen, and then they want to blame all these bad and tragic events on God, and then they lose their faith and they fall away. So is that a sign that the Antichrist is coming and the world is going to come to an end? First off, the Bible never speaks of the Antichrist in those terms. And certainly we never would place anything like that in our lifetime or beyond. So there you are. Now, we'll just leave it at that. But Jesus says, so when the Son of Man comes, will he find faith on the earth? Many are going to fall away. And along with the same idea of martyrdom, hate, and this idea, remember we read another sign of the end coming is betrayal. Now keep in mind the time statement. This is the time of the birth pangs. And if you live in a part of the planet where there are no earthquakes, then you're just out of luck. Because you're just going to have to leave that sign out, I guess. And if you live in a place where everybody loves everybody, we're going to have to leave that sign out. No. There are no signs of the end of the planet because there is no end of the planet. This planet is not going to explode. And you say, oh, well, we have enough nuclear armament to destroy this planet 100 times over or whatever it is now. that's not something that's going to happen. Now, I'm not saying you can't cause devastation and wreak havoc and murder millions and billions of people. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that the earth is not going to be destroyed because it belongs to Yahweh, and He will not allow us to do that. It's part of the prophecy. It's part of ongoing fulfillment of prophecy. So you have a prophecy that's made, and then it changes things, changes the very course of things. And it has an ongoing fulfillment. Somebody will make something of that, I'm sure. So anyway, this idea of where was I at? Betrayal in verse 10. Very much this same idea. Let's talk about false prophets. So in verse 11 of Matthew chapter 24, here's another sign of the end that was to come. Now, let me point something out. He says false prophets are a sign of the end. This is in verse 12. Because lawlessness is increased, most people's love will grow cold. But the one who endures to the end will be saved. This is verse 11. Many false prophets will arise and will mislead many. Well, that's pretty straightforward, isn't it? There are no false prophets today. All right? Simply no false prophets. There are false teachers in a biblical sense, and these false teachers are people who teach for personal gain and personal power. Very much like 2 Peter chapter 2 describes. But there are people who think they know stuff about the Bible and have been misled. But these are not false prophets. So the point that's being made here is false prophets are not around today. If there are no false prophets today, there cannot be an end to what you popularly misconceptualize as the end of the planet. False prophets ceased in the 1st century. If you think I'm wrong about that, let's look at a passage that helps to illustrate this. So we're going to go to Zechariah. If y'all want to turn there with me. So Zechariah. Now, this is chapter 12, 13, and 14. If I can do this without tearing the pages out of my Bible. They're growing very frail. They're coming unsewn, unglued, coming apart. I really need to replace this. But anyway, so you've got through chapter 12 this idea of in that day, you got this city being destroyed. You've got in that day, right? I'm counting, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 times it says in that day, probably more than that if I'm missing one. It talks about Jerusalem being a heavy stone. It talks about the people in Jerusalem being devastated. It talks about the city being devastated. All the nations of the earth being gathered against it. So what time and what day is that? It's not just one day, by the way. It's many. It's the time when they look on whom they have pierced. Well, when is that? Is that in our future or was it that in our past? Well, that's in our past. So what is the time frame and the time element here? It's in the 1st century. It was future to Zechariah, but it's in the past to us. And then in chapter 13, he still continues talking about in that day. Now, keep in mind, we're talking about the fact that there are no false prophets today because there are no prophets. Men cannot prophesy. So this guy that's going around, and he's given all these prophecies about Trump, right? He's just guessing, and so is everybody else. If he misses even one thing to the minutest detail, then he's messed it up. He's not a prophet because prophets were destroyed. The off switch was flipped in 70 at the destruction of the temple. It's in that day. Zechariah 13:1. In that day a fountain will be opened for the house of David and for the inhabitants of Jerusalem for sin and impurity. Well, when did that happen? Has it already happened or is it going to happen? It's already happened. Are you waiting for salvation to come somewhere in the future? That's a real problem. A lot of people are, and they don't even realize it. It will come about in that day, declares the Lord of hosts, that I will cut off the names of the idols from the land. They will no longer be remembered. I will also remove, listen to this, I will remove the prophets and the unclean spirit from the land. And if anyone still prophesies, then his father or mother who gave birth to him will say to him, you shall not live, for you have spoken falsely in the name of the Lord. And his father and his mother who gave birth to him will pierce him through when he prophesies. Also it will come about in that day that the prophets will each be ashamed of his vision when he prophesies, and they will not put on a hairy robe in order to deceive. But he will say, I am not a prophet, I am a tiller of the ground. For a man sold me as a slave in my youth, and one will say to him, what are these wounds between your arms? And he will say, those with which I was wounded in the house of my friends. So he starts prophesying, and he gets beat up for it. His life gets threatened. Do you see the issue here? The issue is, in that day, when the fountain will be opened for the house of David and for the inhabitants of Jerusalem for sin and impurity. When is that? Has that already happened? Yes. So in that time period, in those days, which Jesus outlines in Matthew chapter 24, is when prophecy comes to an end. And a man cannot prophesy. As a matter of fact, the reason his parents would run him through is because of passages like Deuteronomy 18 that says if a man prophesies and it doesn't come true, first off, don't be afraid of him, and secondly, he's to be put to death. You don't falsely prophesy in the name of Yahweh and get away with it. So, back to Matthew 24. This idea of false prophets arising, we know that happened in the first century. There are all kinds of these false prophets. Excellent, Roy. 17 times throughout, 12, 13, and 14? It says, in that day. Now, listen. Here we go. Hang on to your seat. He says these false prophets are going to mislead many. People cannot be misled today because of false prophets. There are no prophets. You can't have a false prophet if there are no prophets. You can have people teaching things that are wrong, but you can't have a false prophet. Not biblically, and certainly not by that definition. So, let's just recap real quick. So, if there are no false prophets today, and that was going to be a sign of the end and people being misled by those false prophets, then the end cannot be, guess what? A physical end to the earth. That's not the question that was being asked. Okay, so let's move on to the next one. Number 13. I'm determined to get through all these. And I never intended to totally exhaust each subject as we go through them. But, we'll do the best we can. So number 13, we've looked at these false prophets. What about increased lawlessness? So we look there in verse 12. He says, because lawlessness is increased, most people's love will grow cold. Well, what kind of lawlessness are we talking about? Well, okay, so I could really go through a lot on this. Let me show you a couple things here. 1 John, let me mark this here. 1 John. Now, if we go to 1 John, nope, there we go. Check this out. Okay, so this is, I need an hour just for this. How can I summarize this? 1 John chapter 2. Okay, go to verse 7. Beloved, I'm not writing a new commandment to you, but an old commandment, which you have had from the beginning. The old commandment is the word which you have heard. On the other hand, I am writing a new commandment to you, which is true in him and in you, because the darkness is passing away and the true light is already shining. Okay, let me try to bring something out here. Go back to Matthew 24, and he says that lawlessness is increased, and most people's love will grow cold. I see two things here, so let's address these. There are individual, the two different signs, but they go hand in hand. This lawlessness that I think he's talking about is this old law, okay, in so many ways, it brought this concept of sin. It taught about sin. It talked about you go, Roy. By the way, um, this lawlessness is in so much a part of the law itself, the law of Moses. Let me illustrate this. Okay, so this lawlessness increases. So you've got people all the more who are saying, we're going to cling to the law of Moses. We're going to do this more and more and more. We're going to love it and hug it and pet it, and we'll make it our own. That kind of thing. And in Romans chapter 7, listen to what Paul says. Paul says, therefore, my brother, this is verse 4, you also were made to die to the law through the body of Christ, so that you might be joined to another, to him who was raised from the dead, in order that we might bear fruit for God. For while we were in the flesh, the sinful passions which were aroused by the law were at work in the members of our body to bear fruit for death. But now we have been released from the law, having died to that body by which we were bound, so that we serve in newness of the Spirit and not in the oldness of the letter. Now, this is going to cause some people's brains just to be set on fire, but he's talking about a corporate body. Look at all of the hours here. He's talking about a corporate body. And he says that this law brought about, it emphasized, it put a spotlight on sin and what sin was. Now, he says, verse 5, back in Romans 7, for while we were in the flesh, the sinful passions which were by the law, this one uses the word aroused, by the law, were at work. What were these sinful passions? Well, it's the same thing that the Gentiles got caught up in. They were caught up in these sinful passions, and Yahweh said to them, fine, whatever, I am so sick and tired. This culminated at the Tower of Babel. Go ahead and worship your gods, he says. Go ahead and give them preeminence above me. You fine, have them over you, and you just live however you want. I'm sick and tired of you. I'm writing you off. This is what Yahweh said to the Gentiles, which was essentially the entire world, except for, not essentially, it was everybody in the whole world, except for, and if you don't think I'm right about that, it lists those, 70 nations or something like that. This is who he said, forget it. Go ahead. You do what you want. Except for Abraham. And he looked at Abraham and he said, Abraham's good. Through him and his seed will the nations be blessed. Now, the interesting thing about that is the Jews obviously came from Abraham. Abraham was their father. There's no dispute there. Whether you're preterist or futurist, there's no dispute there. So, guess what? They became just as wicked and evil as the nations, as the Gentiles. That's the reason the Gentiles were looked down on. But it took them 1,500 years, essentially, to get to that point. And that's when Messiah came. And that's when all of these things came to a head. And lawlessness increased. As a matter of fact, let me share with you something from Ezekiel. Check this out. So in Ezekiel, this is verse 43. I'm not going to spend a lot of time going through this, but let me show you this. So put your thinking caps on here. In Ezekiel chapter 43, this is very much in line with Deuteronomy 32 and how they were going to become very corrupt in their latter years, right? So listen to what Ezekiel has to say. In Ezekiel chapter 43, you got this vision of the temple that was never built, never physically built. It was built spiritually, but it was never physically built. And it will never be built. It's not going to be a third temple. It was destroyed. Jerusalem was destroyed, never to be rebuilt. Isaiah chapter 25. As a matter of fact, Jesus said that tribulation would never happen again. Ezekiel 43, verse 6. Then I heard one speaking to me from the house while a man was standing beside me. So he's still in his vision here about this temple. And he said to me, Son of man, this is the place of my throne and the place of the soles of my feet, where I will dwell among the sons of Israel forever. He's talking about the Feast of Tabernacles. This is the 8th day. This is Revelation 21. If ever a guy could point to Revelation 21 with the Old Testament passage, this is it. And the house of Israel will not again defile my holy name. Did you hear that? He says the house of Israel will not again defile my holy name. He's not talking about the old covenant Israel, Jews, living on and on and on. Okay? He's talking about this remnant that comes out of that old covenant system. And he says, they're not going to defile my name. Now listen to this. Let me find my spot here. He said to me, Son of man, this is the place of my soul's man, and I will dwell among them forever. And the house of Israel will not again defile my holy name, neither, listen to this, they nor their kings. I think there's a good case here to illustrate that kings are these high priests. But I don't have time to go into that. Nor their kings by their harlotry and by the corpses of their kings when they die, by setting their threshold by my threshold, and their doorpost beside my doorpost, with only the wall between me and them. And they, listen to this, and they have defiled my holy name by their abominations which they have committed, so I have consumed them in my anger. Now let them put away their harlotry and the corpses of their kings far from me, and I will dwell among them forever. So we have this description here. And as we've seen in 1 John, we've seen in Romans 7, and we've seen in Ezekiel 43, this idea of increased lawlessness. It's not that people start breaking the law more. It's because people are breaking the law. They're rushing to it. And they're rejecting the new covenant. Lawlessness increases. They don't have faith. When Jesus said, will there be faith on earth when the Son of Man comes? He wasn't, there were lots of people who had faith in the law of Moses. They had faith in Yahweh through the law of Moses. And he says, what about this faith when I come that is the law of faith, not the law of darkness? And that's what was going to increase. I just thought I would point that out. In verse 14 of Matthew chapter 24. I haven't forgot about you. I'm still gonna show you something in verse 36. Oh, I got this. Who asked me that question? Richard. Yeah, Richard Bailey. Okay. But I got, Richard, if I don't get through these 15 things, I will never forgive myself, and I have 2 more to go. And really, I've pretty much talked about this next one. So love grows cold. So look here in verse 12. He says, because lawlessness increased, most people's love will grow cold. Love for what? Love for the truth that Jesus brought, this new covenant. They see what they're doing is they're clinging to the old. Now, these are all signs that the end is going to come. Do you have people clinging to the Old Testament today? Yes. You better believe that they do. But they can't serve the way that people used to. When the temple was around. So, what's the sign? Another sign. When lawlessness increase and the love of many grows cold, the love for what? The love for the truth. The love for this fact that things were changing. And this 8th day celebration is coming in. If you're not familiar with the feast, then you don't have a clue what I'm talking about. But the 8th day is the first day, and it's this celebration that comes after the last 3 feasts in the fall that herald the second coming of Messiah. So once the first 3 feasts in the spring, or 4 feasts in the spring are finalized, and they've done those. They wait about 4 months, and then they go to the next phase, which is those last 3 feasts. And those last 3 feasts illustrate the second coming of the Messiah, which is Yeshua. Some of you know him as Jesus. And he came. And when he came, Yahweh comes down and dwells with us. That's the last and final feast. And that morphs into the 8th day feast. So they were supposed to celebrate that for 7 days. And then on the 8th day, it was to be a perpetual celebration. That our Father has come down to be with us. That's the type and the anti-type. We are living in the 8th day, people. We're living in that day of salvation. That's what the 8th day is. If we're not in the 8th day and you can't have the 8th day celebration and feast, if you don't fulfill the first 7, previous 7, however you want to put it. Okay, last one. Now, here's a good one. Matthew chapter 24. The last sign of the end is, well, actually there's more, but these are the first 15 here. So verse 14 says, "This gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in the whole world as a testimony to all the nations, and then the end will come." So, what's the end? If it's the end of the world, then that means the gospel still has to be preached to all the nations. Has the gospel been preached to all the nations? Well, if you listen to the televangelists today, no, it hasn't been. If you're part of the Rapture Ready movement, you're trying to get everybody ready for the rapture, and you're trying to teach everybody that you can, so that billions of people can die all of a sudden. Or you can just see the scriptures for what they are. It's not the end of the world. It's the end of the age. It's the full consummation of the age. Right? Now, listen to this. Verse 14, Matthew 24, "This gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in the whole world as a testimony to all the nations, and then the end will come." So then the end comes. So how is that possible? Well, let's look at a couple passages here. So let's go to Colossians. Okay, this is Colossians 1, and round about verse 6 says, ready for this? Yeah, I'll just read it. "Which has come to you, this gospel." Let me read verse 5. I hate starting in the middle, so I'm going to go back to verse 3. "We give thanks to God the Father, our Lord Jesus Christ, praying always for you, since we heard of your faith in Christ Jesus," the faith we were talking about, "and the love which you have for all the saints, because of the hope laid up for you in heaven, of which you previously heard in the word of truth, the gospel which has come to you, just as in all the world also, it is constantly bearing fruit and increasing, even as it has been doing in you also, since the day you heard of it and understood the grace of God in truth." So was the gospel preached into all of the world according to Yahweh? Well, you better believe it was. It was preached in the whole world. We read from Matthew chapter 10 and verse 23. I'm not trying to take this out of context, but I just want to show you something here. It says, whenever they persecute you in one city, flee to the next. For truly I say to you, you will not finish going through the cities of Israel until the Son of Man comes. Now, this is talking about persecution, but the reason they were being persecuted, just like in Acts 17 at Thessalonica, is because they were teaching the truth. They were going out and preaching the gospel. They were hard at work at it. They were simply, they were hard at work. Preaching the gospel. So, when we go back to Matthew 24, a brief recap. After these 15 signs, and he's got plenty of others here, as he goes through from verse 15 and onward, he really kind of is explaining them. But there are some more signs, by the way, starting in verse 26. But you've got these signs that preclude the end. Now, you have only got two choices here. Is this the end of the age or the end of the world? if the end that's being spoken here is the end of the world, then you've got 15 signs that happen before the end of the world, and we should not be here. If it's the end of the age, then that makes perfect sense. Now you get to choose confusion or sense. Let me go back here and do something. Let me find this here. Oh, wow. Let's see. Is somebody monopolizing all the comments here? Sure looks like it. Okay. So he asked the question, doesn't it correlate to verse 36? Richard asked that. So, Richard, if you hung in there, I appreciate that. I'll do a little bit of justice here to this, and then I'm going to have to shut it down here in just a few minutes. So, here's what you've got. You've got, matter of fact, I need to pull these up here. So I'll have to show you from an interlinear. Okay, Matthew 24. Whoops, went too far. Okay, so there's that one. How do I do this? Do this again. I'll just pull up 2 here. So I'm going to show you here what these words are, right? So Matthew chapter 24 and verse 3, the term is, oh, what did I do? I am not technically great, guys. I apologize about that. The term is aion, however you want to say it. And then we've got in verse 36. Let me pull this up here. So I'll just show you all these, right? Okay, so it really is not this. Let me get back over here. Okay, so his actual question is, he says age, and I was talking about the age. And so Richard says, doesn't it correlate to generation in verse 36? So it's really not a generation there. Generation is in verse 34. So if I was going to maybe that's what you meant. I'm trying to remember how Scofield did this. Scofield changed it. Scofield, in his translation, in Matthew chapter 24, for the end of verse 3, I think he tried to put Janaea in there, or something like that. And he tried to make it say, because he knew there was a problem there. So his idea to overcome this was just replace the word. Let's just put a word in there that Yahweh did not intend to be in there. So the idea here is, I meant to do this. I'll just show you this. So the idea here is this term. So maybe you can see the little pop-up there. It says from the same as AI, properly an age, by extension, perpetuity, by implication, the world. Of course, they have to put that in there because that's their definition of it. Especially a messianic period. So did I open this? I think I already opened this. So let me show you here the definition of this, and this will help. I could make this larger. Okay, so the definition of this word aeon, or it's aeon, it's a space of time, an age. That's the definition, the simple definition. The way it's used is an age, a cycle of time, especially of the present age as contrasted with the future age, which, of course, they're assuming there's going to be a future age, so that's how they define it. when the scriptures do not teach a future age. One age, we're living in it, and it lasts forever. And of one of a series of ages stretching to infinity. So they acknowledge that there's going to be an age that stretches to infinity. They're just looking for one to come, usually. Not acknowledging that it's already here. So it helps word studies. So notice what it says here. Properly of an age, era, time span, characterized by a specific quality or type of existence. So you've got this age here. But I can't resist explaining this. Notice what they said here. Christians today live in the newer age of the covenant, which I agree with. The time period called the New Testament, which I agree with that. It's characterized by Christ baptizing all believers in the Holy Spirit. I would agree with that to an extent, i.e. engrafting all believers, Old Testament, into his mystical body. Now, believe it or not, I don't have a problem with that, with all the marvelous privileges that go with that. So, he's actually on it. But people can't resist to say, oh, well, this age is talking about, man, I'm running out of time here, and I don't remember exactly where this is at. And I hate to make people dizzy by scrolling through here, but they want to say, oh, well, this is an age that ends when the Lord comes, kind of thing. So let me transition back to that. So that is what Matthew chapter 24 and verse 3 is talking about. Now, I'm pretty sure that Richard was probably talking about verse 34. If I'm wrong about that, Richard, let me know. Let me get back down here. So, generation, I see generation in Matthew 24:34. Verse 36 says, concerning, however, the day, this in the interlinear, in the day, that an hour no one knows, not even the angels of the heavens, nor the Son, if not the Father only. So that's the verse 36. But probably what you're looking for is verse 34. Truly I say to you, this generation will not pass away until all these things take place. Now, I'm going to say that you're pointing out that age is that generation. And the answer to that is absolutely yes, if you're asking it that way. So here's the question. They asked, tell us when will these things be, and what will be the sign of your coming and the end of the age? But listen to what is said in Mark 13. Here's the question that they asked. They asked, tell us when will these things be, and what will be the sign when all of these things are going to be fulfilled? They didn't ask. Mark does not include that in his inspiration. Was it important? Well, obviously it was. Otherwise, Matthew wouldn't have included it. But what's the point that the Spirit's making to us? In Luke 21, listen to this. So they questioned him, this is verse 7, Teacher, when therefore will these things happen, and what will be the sign when these things are about to take place? Now, interestingly enough, when you look at Luke's version in 21, he relies heavily on calling out Jerusalem and Jerusalem's destruction, much more than you see in Mark and Matthew's account. But the interesting thing about this is they had already discussed this thing in Luke chapter 17. So before Jesus tells them about the Olivet Discourse, they had already discussed these things. So when you look at chapter 17 of Luke, these were not images or anything that were new to them. It's just now Jesus plugs them in because of they were there in Jerusalem. They looked around and asked the questions about the buildings and the temple and all that. And in their mind, this temple had been built earthquake proof. This thing was not going anywhere. And so they were would have thought, they just would not have thought about the end of the world. It was not something that the Jews taught. They didn't discuss this. It was not that kind of a topic. So Luke 17, they had already talked about these things, and so they knew. Now, it was no huge deal to them when they got around to the Olivet Discourse. I mean, it was a big deal, obviously, and I'm not trying to downplay that, but I'm just trying to make the point. It was not something that they'd never heard before. So, going back to Matthew 24, so they asked, when is the end of the age? That's what they asked. They did not ask when the end of the world was. And Jesus tells them, I tell you, truly, this generation will not pass away until all these things take place. These 15 signs that the end is coming, when would they take place? Within that age, within that generation. Jesus was crucified in 30, I believe, and the destruction of the temple happened in 70. That's 40 years. Now, that is a biblical generation. Go through the generations at the beginning of the Gospels, and you'll see it's about 40 years. I'm not saying it's dead on 40 years. Hebrews teaches, what is that, Hebrews 1 or 3? Let me look here. Teaches the same concept, that a generation was 40 years. It's Hebrews 3 verse, starting at verse 7 or so. Talks about it being 40 years. That generation, that's generation that Yahweh was angry with, and that was that 40 years that they passed through the wilderness before they got into the promised land. Type and anti-type, people. So, but I'm not seeing generation in verse 36. Matthew. 20. I was looking at verse, Richard, what a scatterbrain I was. So I just explained verse 34. Verse 36 of chapter 23. Truly I say unto you, all these things will come upon this generation. Yes. Amen. You got it. I am so sorry. Yes, you're 100% right. For some reason, my brain went to I'll tell you why, because I've really been putting in some time on verse 36 of chapter 24. So I automatically went there. No, you got it right. I could have just said yes to begin with. It's the same generation that was going to see the, what do you call them, the apostles be martyred, and which he tells them through, the signs that we were talking about there. And he told them that before. So yes, it was that generation, which is, by the way, the same generation of Matthew 24 and verse 34. There you go. I apologize. Okay, I'm going to say that's it. So we'll make it it. And I apologize about getting started so late. I have no idea. This happens to me every week, and it's like they're throwing curves at me, trying to teach me or something. I don't know. And my settings are all changed, and something doesn't come up right or connect right, and then I have to go into all of these back pages or whatever on these programs and figure out what's turned off and what's turned on. And anyway, so I got it figured out, but it took me nearly an hour, and I apologize about that. It almost took me that long to to describe what I did. So anyway, hey, I thank you all. Here's the whole point about this study and every study that I have. It's about salvation. Without these proofs from Scripture and the fulfillment of prophecy, we don't have salvation. Revelation chapter 19 and verse 10, the latter part says, the testimony of Jesus is the spirit of prophecy. So, if you want to hear about Jesus, you want to understand salvation, we have to understand the fulfillment of prophecy. And because we know that all things have been fulfilled, hey, we can go back and, we can make some killer cases for baptism. We can illustrate from Joshua 5, Jeremiah 4. I mean, just all over the place. Not to mention the entire, you got the prophecy, and then you got its fulfillment and its application in the New Testament. So we go to the New Testament. We look at all these reasons that and illustrations that people were baptized. And it's now, I'm not preaching, hey, do Acts chapter 2 and verse 38. I'm explaining why Acts 2 and verse 38 was brought up on the day of Pentecost and how it was fulfillment of prophecy, and how it has this ongoing fulfillment. And that's what this is all about. This is what salvation is about. And when we learn this, this gives us the power and the tools that Yahweh gave us to use to convert the souls of the lost. And that's what we need to be doing. So I want to thank you all for watching and putting up with my craziness here tonight. I'll keep you all in my prayers. There's some people who are watching tonight that I've been praying for, and I want you to know that. And we'll continue our prayers on your behalf. Love you all. We'll see you next week. And just have a good night, and just study. Be diligent to prove what is right, and just follow it. Because you're following Yahweh. You're not following men when you do that. So if I can get a big heart amen to that, we're done. Well, you don't have to, but it is the truth. So we'll see you next time. Y'all have a good night.